So when you speak about the grounded within yourself, I think of many of the viewers being parents and the concept of feeling attuned and grounded within oneself to then be emotionally present for your child during a really tough time
Yes.
in human history.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering what your perspective is when it comes to parenting, children through this really tough time.
To be honest, I never attempted to be a parent
Hmm.
because being a therapist is all I'm capable of doing. I can attune myself with a break in between, right?
Yeah.
And then before the person comes and after they go, I can say goodbye. They're not with me 24 hours.
Yeah.
So
So
for
that's an
me
added stressor.
to expect themselves to do all this beautiful stuff we talk about, which often we fail at when we're in the middle of it, when we're triggered, even as a
Hmm.
therapist, right? So it's
Hmm.
not like I'm always attuned, right? I have my triggers,
Hmm.
but I've learned how to get back to myself. So I think with a parent, it's just so intense right now. So
Hmm.
much more is being expected of them. It's not humanly possible to be the ideal parent they'd like to be,
Hmm.
especially if your spouse is a first responder with all the fears and the all the dangers extra. I mean, the spouse of a first responder is, like your spouse is at risk all the time.
And the risk is different than the traditional risk that it was prior to this
Time.
pandemic,
Yes, yeah, that's right.
because the risk is largely invisible
That's right.
until you're symptomatic of this
Yeah,
virus.
yes. Yeah.
Hmm. So there's a lot of unknown and uncertainty that is likely coming home after a shift. And how do you navigate that uncertainty in your home life? And, and when we talk about transform or transmit, how do we stop the emotional transmission of this onto our children?
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, the closest I can come to it is the fact that I've worked out of my home for 30 some years.
Hmm.
And so not always right in my house, but close by. And it's going back in the house and dealing with my husband, who was a social worker, and later on became a volunteer first firefighter when we were on Hornby. So that's the closest, in a way, experience I have of how do you come back to that ideal therapist self in
Hmm.
all situations. And I don't think that can be expected to a parent who can be sleep deprived, who now is having so much more things on their
Hmm.
plate. And I would say it's more a matter of finding what it is for yourself that helps you, reminds you to take a deep breath, reminds you to feel your feet, reminds you to remember why you love this person.
Yeah.
It's a good thing to have pictures of happy times around, why to remember what I would call that true nature, at those times. And that's a big challenge. And I get a little annoyed with all these emails I'm getting and all these postings I'm getting on, what you need to achieve and do, and all this advice in this time right now. I can't
Hmm.
imagine a parent and receiving that on top of it.
Hmm.
I think it's more a matter of having one person that you can connect to, who's going to help you come back to yourself. So it can be a friend, it can be a neighbor you call. It's the support, I think, is going to be primary. How are we going to be together in this
Hmm.
way?
I think what you're saying is similar to your approach to working with individuals in therapy, is that how you deal and navigate this crisis is as unique as your fingerprint.
That's right.
And finding those ways to ground oneself is
Yeah.
going to be a very individual process.
Yeah, and all these wonderful things are really easy until you're faced with,
The
you know,
adversity of it all.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. The daily life stressors.
And a lot of the time our bodies take over, like
Hmm.
it's not, now at least they're beginning to talk about the head, the head brain and the heart brain and the gut brain, right?
Mm-hmm.
Glad they're starting to see the thinking, the feeling, and the will. And the gut brain in those situations, which, is all over. I'm not going to go into that part because I can't remember the words anymore, but is the one that will take over when it comes to survival.
Right.
When you pushed beyond that trigger. And then we go back to how when we started, things that we're able to make changes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And those changes, we've practiced them in situations where that weren't too difficult. Like you,
As a parent, I know that I'm not perfect. And one of the things that I kind of struggle with is when that reactivity after a long night shift or something infiltrates my parenting style. And I might say or do something that I instantly regret. And I guess what I'm curious of is, how do parents recover from that on a deeper level? And I guess what I'm really talking about is self-compassion and forgiveness,
yes,
and giving yourself permission to realize that you're under stress. It's a
and
tough process. Yeah.
yeah, but no relationship is perfect. We have to learn to repair every time we fall off.
Mm-hmm.
And it's children are very forgiving, and apologizing goes a long way.
Mm-hmm.
When you calm and you let the child know that you're sorry and that it's a difficult time and you're going to try to do better, right? And you're
Mm-hmm.
sorry you've upset them.
So you've spent many years working with children
Yeah.
in a one-to-one capacity. What impact does apologies from a primary caregiver have on a child that you've seen as a therapist?
Well, you have to have a sense of timing
Yes.
because the child has to be calm enough to hear you.
Mm-hmm.
With children, when a child is activated, they see the movement and hear the sound of your voice. It's just like when you're dissociated, but you don't process what you're being told. And depending on the age of the child, they have a capacity for just very few words, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they also, you also have to use concrete words the
Mm-hmm.
younger they are. So it's very different depending on the age, but it's more a matter of timing. And I think the sound of your voice, the gesture goes a long way. I think children respond to your body language way more than your words a lot of the time. They have to be congruent.
Mm-hmm.
So if you say, I'm sorry, but you still feel like you want to wring their little necks,
They can sense that.
and they're very good readers,
Mm-hmm.
and they see and imitate and soak up. They're sponges, but how they interpret what is done is something that you always have to check, especially like right now with all the stuff they're being exposed to.
So let me kind of switch this up onto a related topic. Is first responders are trained to function over feeling. In other words, get through their day within this paramilitary workplace that's very different from a loving, nurturing home life. And
Yes.
somehow they must transition seamlessly from this complex work culture into
Yes.
their home life.
Mm-hmm.
And when you speak about body language and these children, our children, being very attuned to nonverbal communication,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think the impact that has on a child is when we overlook the developing nature of a child at the expense of us just plowing through our day in this somewhat function over feeling or somewhat reactive mindset?
Well, they soak it up
Mm-hmm.
and they become very tense, and they don't feel safe to have feelings. They don't feel safe to make mistakes. They don't feel safe to upset you. And sometimes you might be looser, more relaxed than others. So they're reading you, but they never know. So they will become hypervigilant usually.
And what
And
does hypervigilant look like for a child?
well, they always reading you. Like
Mm-hmm.
they always, so they both sensing and seeing you. And so what happens is, instead of feeling themselves, like, being in themselves, they always out there.
Right.
So instead of developing boundaries in a safe place this way, their little tentacles are always out there sensing you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And if they sense, usually, that you're uptight, they've usually learned how to get you to blow up so that it's over and then it's safe again.
Okay.
Some children do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So if there has been, let's say, violence in the home, which there is in a lot of homes, or blow-ups or reactivity, the child senses it and is just sensing you. As soon as you walk through that door, they can feel it.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're not busy with playing and being a child. They always, it turns you into a very good therapist when you grow up. And if you can transform it into your capacity for attunement from a safe place,
Right.
that's where we get our training, so many of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
The child then is kind of reading you, as I said, and some of them, they will learn to act out. Others will withdraw.
Mm-hmm.
And,
so you're talking about being shy and kind of introverted within themselves?
well, if you start a child who is naturally so, and then get hurt and very affected by everything that's going on, then you have other children, who are, their true nature is more a bit of a dandelion, and somehow, for some reason, they keep that, but they often develop other ways of dealing with it, like being funny, entertaining, uh, um, getting people to like them. They're they have different ways, but whatever way it is, there's a price to pay if you
Absolutely.
don't have a time and a place to express and transform those feelings. So I would say, and I certainly had to practice that for myself in stressful times.
Mm-hmm.
And it might help, other people in the helping profession and the first responder profession, is to have a break in between where I try to find a way. Let's say for you, you still run, do you?
Yes, I try to.
Like really go for a quick run before you go home.
Yeah.
For me, it's walking at first, to stop the thoughts. I listen to an interesting podcast or some music. My thoughts slow down. Then I can, be without it and breathe and look at nature.
Mm-hmm.
It really, really helps to have, just as I do in between sessions, or if you guys like, it's so much more intense what you do than what, in my situation. So, but to have something that you love, that you've tried so far, often something that helped you survive your childhood,
Mm-hmm.
positive, that if you can reconnect, to have a time with that, to expect yourself to go straight from a shift to being with your child, and sometimes you have no choice,
Mm-hmm.
is not humanly possible, to not have one going to the other. And there's also, you put an armor,
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to take it off sometimes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those professional kind of things, like when I go walking and I see somebody in the yard with a man with a little girl, it's easy for me to go to this place. Oh, I wonder if, I've got to look more closely at this. It's like, there's a word for professional. There's something that stays from your profession, that sticks, because you
Right.
practice it so much, how it
Yes.
changes how you view things and how you are.
Absolutely. And the same thing happens with first responders, as you're mentioning,
Yeah.
of maybe being that hypervigilant individual within the home place, which is tremendously isolating if you don't have conscious control over that.
Well, there's also like being in charge of,
Mm-hmm.
basically, of your instincts all the time. That there's a price to pay for that, right?
Mm-hmm. When I work with a lot of firefighters, I'll often ask them in my teachings, how many of you have had your spouse call you controlling?
Yeah.
And almost everyone laughs and puts up their hand.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, you're used to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there is, sometimes when you have an arm around, you get so tight that you can blow up more easily, because it's like having a corset and you can't breathe,
Mm-hmm.
like,
Absolutely.
and so it's so essential to have ways of blowing off the steam of, if all this effort, all this
Mm-hmm.
going, it's really essential. Whether it's just going for a quick swim, screaming underwater. I love screaming underwater, pretending I'm a shark, and and then I'm a dolphin, and then I can be this nice spouse and this nice to this. Yes, I remember the change in my husband, who'd been a social worker, when we retired to Hornby Island, and he became a volunteer firefighter. I thought he was already has a tendency being, to be a bit controlling, but this was like, geez, this is not the army. And I found it catches quickly. Yeah.
Absolutely. And there's not a lot of direction or training in
Yeah.
how we're to transition from that complex workplace that often the value system contradicts a lot of the values that make a loving, present, home-based environment.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And it's such a shame, because there is, it is like, it is such a wonderful thing to want to be a helper.
mhm.
Like, there's such good intentions when you start.
Yes.
Generally, I've worked sometimes with policemen and firefighters. Each profession has its little culture,
Mhm.
and qualities that I see. But all firefighters that I've ever come across have always come across with such kindness,
Mm.
such ability to reassure you when you're so scared,
Mhm.
and to calm you, and that's like, that's beautiful. and,
Mhm.
and and so I think it's also important to take the armor off, so you can reconnect with that initial, part. Like, it can cover, it's like aging and getting arthritis,
Mhm.
like if
It's
you
a
don't.
gradual process that you may not actually notice is happening
Yeah.
to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's so essential especially now, to have moments uh, of blowing it off in a fun way.
Mhm.
But most of us, like, usually when we need it the most is when we least feel like doing what we know is good for us. Like, we all know what's good for us.
Yeah.
There's nothing I'm saying that everybody doesn't know. Like, it's just, we all know what I'm saying. We forget it when we need it the most. And
Absolutely.
it shuts down. And now you're explaining it through neurobiology. So, but yeah, that's when you feel the least like, and that's when you have to watch whatever I might call unhealthy mechanisms you've developed.
Mhm.
Whether you're a parent, whether it's a child, whether it's male, female, we all have usually developed some more healthy ways, and then some not so healthy ways. And
Mhm.
it's an important time to reflect on that, because we need to feel ourselves more. Unhealthy ways shrink that part of you.
Absolutely.
Like, it's toxicity. It's like acid rain on this beautiful plant,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
we need water. We need to water each other. We need light. We need, to breathe. So we have to do that for ourselves and each other. And always have somebody, always remember being told that what being faithful meant is that to remember the best of that other person when they're so far away from who they are.
Great.
And that's for oneself as well. But we can't really do that for oneself so much. We need, they talk about this self-regulation a lot the last few
Mhm.
years. What I
Mhm.
is we take charge of yourself. My experience is we all have places where we need what is now called more co-regulation, which is what the child needs from the parent. But no matter how old we are, we all need somebody who can be what you might call a co-regulator, somebody, who reminds you, and in their presence, you come back to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of us who are more in a position, let's say, to be teachers or mentors and so on, we also need to have someone like that, whether it's a peer or someone. And I must say, for the 45 years I've been doing this work, I've always had someone outside my profession, outside my work, that I have gone to make me come back to myself and what I know. And so I would say finding, not even, like, it doesn't have to be a paying professional.
Mm-hmm.
It can be an elder that usually, or someone who, and that elder will need someone too. So we all need each other, I think, in that way. This is going to be so important.
But also, as you speak about childhood adversity, I think a lot of people are probably self-reflecting on how they got here today.
Yeah.
And I think that there's just so much value in what you have to say and the metaphors as well.
Well, there is a quick story I wanted to tell you about,
Yes.
about adversity. One of the things, I was raised on stories of the concentration camps because people coming back. I was in Normandy. And one of the things that struck me is that those who had already suffered adversity and who'd already been, who had already been familiar with it and also been sometimes, not always, helped with it, survived the concentration camps a lot better than people who had their whole life very rosy and very, like, we're not familiar with, with pain, with any of the things that they struggle with. They had been overprotected.
Absolutely.
Overprotection is, I think, a lot of what's happened in our society as well. And so it's very difficult it makes it difficult to face something like that for the first time without having had some practice. So for those of us who've had suffering, and I think that's why some of you guys are able to be firefighters, and I'll tell you a quick story again from my friend on Hornby Island, whose husband was the fire chief, who sadly died last year. And when I first met her, she said, you guys are really lucky. You're as screwed up as everybody else, but you're doing something good with it. And that is my message to all of us responders.
Well, that's a wonderful way to end our time together today, Marie-José.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And I love the setting that you're in. I'm very familiar by the pictures on your website. Yes. And we'll be sharing your website with viewers so they can see the gallery of what you've done with your play therapy room and your beautiful garden. And as you mentioned, you work with clients from ages 2 to 92.
That's right, I do.
Yeah.
I do.
Well, thank you for your time, Marie-José. I'm sure this isn't the last conversation we're going to have by Zoom. And hopefully at some point we can have a conversation in person over tea.
Yes, I will look forward to that very much.
Well, thank
you.
you.
It's so lovely to see you again.
You too. Thank you, Marie-José.
You're very welcome. Thank you.